So we'll start this session by recapping on what we've talked about in the previous sessions. We thought very much about what constitutes challenging behaviour and what that might look like. So behaviours such as hurting other people, perhaps hurting themselves, destructive behaviour such as throwing things or breaking furniture. It might be that the child eats things that they aren't meant to eat or that are inedible, and other behaviours such as spitting and smearing. And we thought a little bit about what we needed to think about before we put strategies in place. So looking at whether or not a child is unwell or in pain, whether they're getting any side effects from some medication. We looked at the environmental issues that might be happening around the child, and psychological issues such as lack of sleep, or perhaps things that have been going on in the family. In this section, we want to introduce the idea of positive behaviour support. The idea is that we want to create a very individualised plan that understands the reasons behind a child's challenging behaviour, and what a child might be trying to communicate through their behaviour. This helps us think about how we can put strategies in place, not just to manage the behaviour, but to teach your child the new skills that they need to communicate their needs in a more appropriate way. Watch this video on positive behaviour support, which we think really explains the idea, and why we use it as an approach. So how do we approach this idea about improving behaviours? Hopefully you've already started to be detectives for your child, and you might have started to notice that there's key times or key places that are more likely to be a trigger to your child's challenging behaviour. And while we're trying to teach new ways to communicate and we're trying to put coping skills and strategies in place, it might be helpful to try and avoid these triggers as much as possible. The time for working on building tolerance to certain triggers is after we've put this plan in place. If it's not possible to avoid these triggers completely, then it might be helpful to notice the signs that your child is becoming distressed, and sort of preempting the challenging behaviour that may happen, and remove your child as early as possible before the challenging behaviour escalates. On this next slide, we've listed some triggers. It was actually written for specifically for children with autism and sensory processing difficulties, but I do think that these principles could be applied to any children, with a learning disability or with challenging behaviour. So as you can see on here, some of the triggers that we find happen frequently for our children. A situation might be too loud, it might be too busy, it might be a new experience. We often find there's lots of triggers around clothing being too loose or too tight, or just not quite feeling right. And so just to have a think about what kind of, whether any of these ring a bell, and does that help you to start to think about what the triggers may be for your child. A big part of planning positive behaviour support is to build on your child's skills, to give them a little bit more independence, and by doing that, hopefully improving their self-esteem. What we want overall is for the child to become less dependent on the adults around them, and therefore hopefully reducing that frustration that often goes hand in hand. Take any opportunity to learn that you can. It might take more time than usual, but if your child is engaged in an activity with you, they're less likely to become bored and seek other ways to be entertained. And it might be that this will take you more time and perhaps more one-to-one time initially, but as that skill becomes embedded, hopefully you won't have to give as much support. We often hear from parents, and certainly as a parent myself, I think sometimes it's just, particularly perhaps in the mornings when we're under a time pressure, it's very much easier to do that to, if the skill is around getting dressed, eating, it's easier as a parent to perhaps do those things for your child because you're under time pressure. So perhaps pick a skill where perhaps it isn't first thing in the morning, where you've got the time to dedicate to allowing the child to do that thing themselves, and because it might be that skill needs to be taught over and over for it to become part of their usual routine. So what kind of skills are we thinking about when we're talking about teaching things? When you're shopping, you might be able to give your child a list of things they need to find. If they can't read, would they be able to use pictures on a little board? Can they give money to the shop assistant? When they're cooking, can they pass you things? Could they play with some of the food while you're cooking? Could you give them some flour and water to mix while you're mixing? Can they pass you things to put in the washing machine, or could they help you empty the washing machine? Make tidying up a game where you all take turns to put a toy away. Schools often will use music to help with those kind of skills. So the tidying up time has a song. They have a song that will go on just before dinner time, and that can also help with kind of transitions throughout the day as well. One of the strategies that we find really helpful for teaching new skills is to use something called graded assistance, and that's to look at all the areas of a task that you're trying to teach. So breaking it down into little steps, working out what you feel a child can do, and filling in the rest with your support, and gradually over time reducing the amount of support that you give with a task. So it might be that perhaps if you're looking at the skills of getting dressed, you might start simply with you doing all of the tasks apart from perhaps just pulling up the last little bit, or pulling up a zipper, or pulling up a sock, so that the child actually achieves and can get the reward and the praise for trying, and gradually over time you take a step back and the child does more and more of that little task. These tasks have to be really achievable, so don't perhaps start with the biggie, and make sure that children are always given lots and lots of praise and little rewards for trying really hard. Make sure, if you can, to give your child some level of control. A lot of frustration can come around feeling out of control, so take any opportunity you can to offer a very limited choice. And it's not about giving the child complete control, but about having some say in what happens to them and feeling involved. So, for example, you might want to say, do you want to wear the blue pyjamas or the yellow pyjamas? Do you want to sit in that chair or this chair? Which side of the car do you want to get into? Little offers that give a very limited choice, but may let the child feel that they've had some level of choice in the matter. By actively teaching skills to our children, we're getting tasks done throughout the day. Your child has your complete attention while you're teaching these skills. They're not having the chance to get bored and looking for entertainment inappropriately. They're improving their confidence to complete tasks, and hopefully improving their self-esteem, and it promotes active engagement in their day-to-day life rather than being passive participants where they have things done to them rather than with them. There's real evidence that this approach starts to reduce challenging behaviour in children with a learning disability.